The Medal of Honor sat in Admiral Rebecca Hawthorne's desk drawer like a secret too dangerous to tell. The brass caught the fluorescent light streaming through her office windows at Naval Base Coronado, casting fractured rainbows across the citation that bore a name she'd seen scrubbed from every official record 3 years ago. Captain Evelyn "Ghost" Reeves, the woman who died in a classified operation over the South China Sea. The woman whose body was never recovered. The woman who, according to the maintenance logs she discovered that morning, had been cleaning toilets in Building 47 for the past 18 months. Hawthorne's fingers traced the edges of the metal, her mind racing through possibilities that made her question everything she thought she knew about military intelligence. The citation was authentic. She'd verified the serial numbers twice. But Captain Reeves was supposed to be dead, her FA-18 Super Hornet obliterated by enemy fire during a Black Ops mission that officially never happened. The Pentagon had held a closed-door memorial service. Her squadron had painted her call sign on the ready room wall. The Navy had moved on. But janitorial staff didn't have access to Admiral's offices after hours. Security cameras showed no forced entry. The medal had simply appeared, placed with surgical precision next to her morning briefings like someone wanted her to find it. Someone who knew she'd been the one to sign Reeves' death certificate based on satellite imagery and radio silence. Someone who understood that Hawthorne carried the weight of that decision in the hollow spaces between her ribs. The intercom crackled to life, making her flinch. "Admiral, maintenance is here for the quarterly cleaning inspection." Her aide's voice sounded different somehow, charged with an undercurrent she couldn't identify. "Send them in," Hawthorne replied, sliding the medal beneath a stack of deployment orders. Her heart hammered against her chest as footsteps echoed in the corridor. Heavy boots, the kind worn by someone accustomed to carrying weight. The door opened, and a figure in Navy maintenance coveralls stepped inside, face obscured by the shadow of a baseball cap pulled low. But Hawthorne recognized the posture immediately, the fighter pilot's swagger that no amount of camouflage could hide. "Ma'am," the janitor said, voice rough with disuse, "permission to clean your office." Admiral Hawthorne stared into eyes she'd seen in countless briefings, eyes that belonged to a ghost. The maintenance cart rattled into the room, loaded with cleaning supplies that looked suspiciously like they'd never been used. Every instinct Hawthorne had developed during 23 years of service screamed that this was wrong, that the woman standing before her should be fertilizing coral reefs in the South China Sea, not pushing a mop across government linoleum. But those were definitely Evelyn Reeves' hands gripping the cart handle, scarred from a training accident in flight school, marked by a distinctive birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. "You're supposed to be dead," Hawthorne whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Reeves moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd spent years dodging surface-to-air missiles, positioning herself between the door and the Admiral's desk. "Death's a funny thing in our line of work, ma'am. Sometimes it's more like a transfer to a different kind of duty." The office suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Hawthorne's hand instinctively moved toward her sidearm, then stopped. Protocol demanded she call security, report the breach, initiate a full investigation. But protocol hadn't prepared her for resurrection. "The medal," Hawthorne said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You left it for me. You signed my death certificate." Reeves' tone carried no accusation, just the flat delivery of fact. "Seemed appropriate you should know I was still breathing." Outside the windows, FA-18s traced contrails across the California sky, their engines' roar muffled by bulletproof glass. Hawthorne watched them climb toward the sun, remembering the last time she'd seen Reeves in a cockpit, pre-flight checklist complete, helmet reflecting the morning light like armor. That woman had been confident, untouchable, carrying herself with the swagger that marked the Navy's elite. This woman wore exhaustion like a second skin. "What happened out there?" Hawthorne asked. "The mission brief said you were KIA." Reeves' laugh held no humor. "The mission brief said a lot of things that weren't exactly true. Turns out intel had some gaps, big ones." She began methodically wiping down surfaces that were already spotless, her movements mechanical, practiced. My bird got hit, but not by enemy fire. Friendly fire's got a different signature when it tears through your engine cowling. The words hung in the air like smoke from a crash site. Hawthorne felt the foundations of everything she'd believed about that mission beginning to crumble. Friendly fire meant someone had wanted Reeves dead. Someone with access to flight plans, radio frequencies, and the clearance to order a weapons release in contested airspace. Who ordered the shot? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Reeves continued cleaning, but her eyes never left Hawthorne's face. Took me 18 months of listening to conversations from maintenance closets to piece it together. The implication struck Hawthorne like a punch to the sternum. Reeves hadn't just survived, she'd been investigating, using her presumed death as cover to unravel a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of command. The janitor's coveralls weren't a disguise, they were camouflage for the most dangerous kind of operation. Reeves reached into her cleaning cart and withdrew a manila folder thick with photographs, radio transcripts, and financial records. She placed it on Hawthorne's desk with the same precision she'd once used to drop ordnance on target. Everything's in there. Names, dates, bank accounts. Turns out some of our admirals have been selling flight plans to the highest bidder. Hawthorne's world tilted on its axis. The folder contained evidence of treason that would destroy careers, end lives, and reshape the Navy's command structure. Photographs showed money changing hands in foreign ports. Communications intercepts revealed tactical information flowing to enemy intelligence services, and financial records traced payments that coincided with American casualties. "Why come to me?" Hawthorne asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Because you were the only one who questioned the mission parameters," Reeves replied. "You pushed for better intel, demanded backup plans, wanted extraction protocols that would have saved lives. They overruled you, but I remembered." She paused in her cleaning, meeting Hawthorne's gaze directly. "And because you're the only one clean enough to do what needs to be done." The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the office floor. Hawthorne could hear the distant sound of helicopters conducting training exercises, their rotors beating against the California air like mechanical hearts. Somewhere in those buildings, in those hangars and ready rooms, were officers who'd sold their honor for deposits in offshore accounts. "They'll deny everything," Hawthorne said, flipping through pages that documented betrayal at the highest levels. "This evidence won't mean anything without witnesses." Reeves smiled for the first time since entering the office, and it transformed her face completely. "Who said I was the only one who survived?" The statement hit Hawthorne like revelation. If Reeves had survived, if she'd been operating under deep cover for 18 months, then other supposedly dead pilots might still be breathing. Other ghosts might be walking through the ranks, collecting evidence, preparing for a reckoning that would shake the military to its core. "How many?" Hawthorne whispered. "Enough," Reeves replied, returning to her methodical cleaning. "We call ourselves the custodial corps. Funny how much people will say around someone they think is invisible." The irony wasn't lost on Hawthorne. The janitors, the maintenance staff, the invisible workers who kept the military machine running, they'd become the perfect intelligence network. Who would suspect a cleaning lady of espionage? Who would watch their words around someone emptying trash cans? But as the implications sank in, Hawthorne realized the true scope of what Reeves had accomplished. This wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about rebuilding trust in a system that had been compromised from within. The ghosts weren't seeking revenge. They were seeking justice. "What do you need from me?" Hawthorne asked. Reeves' hands stilled on her cleaning cloth, permission to stop hiding. The weight of command settled on Hawthorne's shoulders like the crushing pressure of deep water. She could order Reeves back into the shadows, let the investigation continue in secret, protect the Navy from the scandal that would inevitably follow. Or she could trust the woman who died for her country and lived to expose its betrayers. Outside, another flight of Super Hornets roared past the windows, their afterburners painting temporary stars against the morning sky. Hawthorne thought about the pilots in those cockpits, trusting their lives to intelligence reports that might have been purchased by the enemy, following orders that might lead them into carefully prepared ambushes. She opened her desk drawer and withdrew the Medal of Honor, holding it up to catch the light. The inscription read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty." But what constituted duty when the system itself was corrupt? "Consider yourself officially alive, Captain Reeves," Hawthorne said, placing the medal on her desk where anyone entering could see it. "And consider this office your operational headquarters." Reeves straightened to her full height, the janitor's slouch falling away like shed skin. When she spoke again, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Thank you, Admiral. It's good to be back from the dead." The transformation was remarkable to witness. Gone was the anonymous maintenance worker, replaced by the fighter pilot who'd earned her call sign by appearing out of nowhere to save her squadron from an ambush over Afghanistan. Ghost had returned to the world of the living, and she brought with her the power to expose those who'd tried to bury the truth. Hawthorne activated her secure communication system, fingers hovering over keys that would set irreversible events in motion. "Who do we call first?" "The FBI, Naval Criminal Investigative Service, and the Inspector General," Reeves replied without hesitation. "And we'll need protection details for everyone in the custodial corps. Once this breaks, the people we're exposing will get desperate." The next few hours would determine whether justice or chaos prevailed. Hawthorne began typing, each keystroke a nail in the coffin of a conspiracy that had cost American lives for profit. But as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into the most dangerous mission of their careers. Because the enemy this time wasn't flying foreign fighters or launching missiles from distant ships. The enemy was sitting in offices just like this one, wearing uniforms identical to theirs, and they had everything to lose. By noon, Naval Base Coronado hummed with unusual activity. Unmarked sedans filled the visitor parking lot, their occupants wearing the serious expressions of federal investigators. In secure conference rooms, teams of NCIS agents spread evidence across tables, building cases that would result in courts-martial and criminal prosecutions. The custodial corps emerged from the shadows one by one, shedding their janitorial coveralls to reveal the uniforms of supposedly dead heroes. Captain Marcus "Wraith" Thompson had been cleaning the base commander's office for 6 months, his ears tuned to every conversation about arms deals and classified technology transfers. Lieutenant Commander Rosa "Phantom" Delgado had spent 8 months emptying trash cans in the intelligence building, photographing documents that detailed the sale of satellite reconnaissance to foreign powers. Each ghost had their specialty, their territory, their carefully gathered evidence. Hawthorne watched from her office window as FBI agents escorted Admiral Jonathan Kessler from the command building in handcuffs. Kessler had been her mentor once, the man who taught her that honor wasn't just a word carved into academy buildings, but a principle worth dying for. The betrayal cut deeper than any enemy action, leaving wounds that would never fully heal. "Hard to watch?" Reeves asked, entering with a fresh pot of coffee and 2 cups that actually looked clean. "He recommended me for promotion to Admiral," Hawthorne replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Told me the Navy needed leaders who couldn't be bought." "Maybe that's exactly why he recommended you," Reeves suggested, settling into the chair across from Hawthorne's desk. "Sometimes the corrupt need honest people in place to provide cover. Nothing says clean operation like having a straight arrow in command." The thought that her entire career might have been orchestrated by criminals made Hawthorne's stomach clench. But as she looked at the evidence still spread across her desk, she realized it didn't matter. What mattered was stopping the hemorrhage of secrets that had already cost too many lives. "How many more are out there?" she asked. "Ghost pilots, I mean." 17 confirmed, maybe more, Reeves replied. Turns out, friendly fire incidents have increased by 300% over the last 5 years. Most of the time, nobody asks questions when a pilot dies in combat. The mathematics of murder laid out in cold statistics. 17 families who'd grieved for heroes who weren't actually dead. 17 funerals for empty caskets. 17 names carved into memorials for pilots who were emptying trash cans and listening to conversations that would bring down the system that had tried to kill them. Hawthorne's secure phone rang, the sharp tone cutting through her thoughts. "Admiral Hawthorne." "Ma'am, this is Agent Morrison, FBI. We need you and Captain Reeves at the Federal Building immediately. There's been a development." The drive to the Federal Building passed in tense silence, their escort of unmarked vehicles creating a bubble of security around them. Reeves had changed into a flight suit that still bore her squadron patches, the fabric creased from years of storage but the insignia still sharp against the olive-green material. She looked like herself again, Hawthorne realized. Not the broken ghost who'd been hiding in plain sight, but the warrior who'd earned her wings through skill and courage. Agent Morrison met them at the building's entrance, his expression grim. "We've intercepted communications suggesting there's going to be an attempt on your lives within the next 24 hours. The conspiracy goes higher than we initially thought." Inside the secure briefing room, a wall of monitors displayed intercepts, surveillance photos, and organizational charts that mapped corruption through the highest levels of military command. At the center of it all was a photograph of Defense Secretary William Crawford, his official portrait now marked with red lines connecting him to shell companies, foreign bank accounts, and a network of compromised officers. "The Secretary of Defense," Hawthorne breathed. "He's been selling intelligence for 8 years, Morrison confirmed. Your pilots were getting too close to the truth, so he ordered them eliminated. When that didn't work, he tried to bury the whole thing under classified stamps and sealed records." Reeves studied the organizational chart with the analytical mind of a tactical planner. "He can't operate alone. This kind of network requires infrastructure, communications, people willing to pull triggers when necessary." "You're right," Morrison agreed, clicking to the next screen. "We've identified a private military contractor called Meridian Solutions. They've been handling the wet work, making problems disappear. Their next target appears to be anyone connected to the Custodial Corps investigation." The briefing continued for 2 hours, each revelation more disturbing than the last. The corruption hadn't been opportunistic. It had been systematic, carefully planned, and ruthlessly executed. American service members had died not in service to their country, but as sacrifices to protect a criminal enterprise that had turned national defense into a profit center. As they prepared to leave, Morrison handed them each a secure communications device. "Stay in touch. We're moving you to a safe house until we can roll up the rest of the network." But Reeves shook her head. "With respect, Agent Morrison, safe houses are for people who want to hide. We've been hiding for 18 months. It's time to fight back." The ride back to Coronado felt different now, charged with the electricity of an approaching storm. Hawthorne could see the change in Reeves' posture, the way her eyes swept the skyline for threats, the unconscious way her hand rested near her sidearm. The janitor was gone completely now, replaced by a warrior preparing for battle. "What did you have in mind?" Hawthorne asked as their convoy approached the base gates. "Crawford's going to run," Reeves replied. "Men like him always run when the walls start closing in, but he'll need to tie up loose ends first, and we're the biggest loose end he's got." Hawthorne understood immediately. They weren't just potential victims, they were bait. Crawford would have to come for them, and when he did, they'd be ready. It was a dangerous gamble, but it offered something that hiding in a safe house never could, the chance to end this decisively. Back at Hawthorne's office, they began planning an operation that would have seemed impossible 12 hours earlier. Using her authority as Admiral, Hawthorne could position resources, control access, and create the conditions for a trap that would snare not just Crawford but his entire network. Reeves brought the tactical expertise of a pilot trained to turn disadvantage into victory, finding ways to use their enemies' assumptions against them. As the sun set over San Diego Bay, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, they finalized their plans. Tomorrow would bring either justice or catastrophe, and they'd chosen to meet it head-on rather than hide in shadows. The ghosts of the custodial corps had spent long enough being dead. It was time to start living again. The attack came at dawn, as Hawthorne had predicted it would. Meridian Solutions favored the golden hour for their operations, enough light to operate effectively, but enough shadow to maintain plausible deniability if things went wrong. Their mistake was assuming that a Navy admiral and a dead fighter pilot would be sleeping peacefully in a compromised location. Instead, Hawthorne and Reeves waited in the empty hangar they designated as their operational headquarters, surrounded by carefully positioned NCIS agents and FBI tactical teams. Motion sensors tracked the approaching assault force, while thermal imaging revealed their weapons and equipment. The hunters had become the hunted. 6 vehicles, 24 personnel, Reeves reported from her position overlooking the hangar floor. Professional-grade equipment, military precision. These aren't mercenaries, they're former special operations. Hawthorne keyed her radio. All units hold position. Let them commit to the breach before we reveal our presence. The tactical situation unfolded with mechanical precision. Meridian's assault team moved like clockwork, clearing corners and advancing through the hangar with the confidence of operators who'd never faced serious resistance. They expected to find 2 women hiding behind desks, not a carefully orchestrated counterambush. Federal agents. The shout echoed through the hangar as floodlights blazed to life, turning the predators into startled prey caught in the open. For a moment, time seemed suspended, both sides processing the reversed situation. Then someone opened fire. The gun battle that followed lasted exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds, but it felt like hours compressed into heartbeats. Reeves moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd survived dogfights at 30,000 feet, finding cover and returning fire with the precision that had made her a legend in her squadron. Hawthorne coordinated the federal response with the calm authority of someone who'd commanded ships in combat zones. When the smoke cleared, 12 Meridian operatives were in custody, 6 were receiving medical treatment, and 6 would never report to another client. More importantly, their communications gear contained enough evidence to identify every member of Crawford's network. "It's over," Agent Morrison announced, surveying the aftermath. "Crawford's been arrested at Andrews Air Force Base trying to board a private jet to Switzerland. The entire network is rolling up as we speak." But Reeves wasn't celebrating. She stood at the hangar's entrance, looking out at the flight line where FA-18s were preparing for morning training missions. Her expression carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much death, caused too much of it, and wasn't sure how to live with peace. "What happens now?" Hawthorne asked, joining her at the threshold between shadow and sunlight. "Now we try to remember who we were before all this started," Reeves replied. "And we try to build something better from what's left." The investigation that followed would consume months, revealing the full scope of a conspiracy that had reached into every branch of the military. Congressional hearings would dissect the failures of oversight that had allowed such corruption to flourish. Reforms would be implemented, systems redesigned, and new safeguards established to prevent future betrayals. But for Hawthorne and Reeves, the real work began with smaller things. Teaching junior officers that honor wasn't just a concept from academy textbooks, but a daily choice that defined who they were as warriors and as human beings. Rebuilding trust in institutions that had been compromised by the very people sworn to protect them. Reeves returned to flight status, but she never returned to who she'd been before. The woman who climbed into the cockpit now carried the knowledge that enemies could wear familiar uniforms, that orders could be compromised, and that sometimes the greatest act of patriotism was disobedience. She flew with that weight, but she flew. Hawthorne's promotion to Fleet Admiral came with responsibilities she'd never imagined. Not just commanding ships and aircraft, but rebuilding the moral foundation of an institution that had been shaken to its core. Some days the task seemed impossible. Other days, she watched young pilots like Reeves had once been, confident, untouchable, and absolutely certain of their cause, and she found reason for hope. The custodial corps disbanded officially, their members returning to their original duties or transitioning to new assignments. But they maintained contact, forming a network of watchmen who would ensure that the shadows never again concealed such thorough betrayal. They'd learned that democracy's greatest strength, the trust between citizen and defender, was also its greatest vulnerability. Years later, when military historians wrote about the corruption scandal that had nearly destroyed the Navy's command structure, they would focus on the organizational failures, the systemic weaknesses, and the regulatory responses. But those who lived through it remembered something different: the way ordinary people had chosen to do extraordinary things when confronted with evil wearing familiar faces. The medal still sat on Hawthorne's desk, now in her Pentagon office, catching the light that streamed through bulletproof windows overlooking the Potomac River. Sometimes visitors would ask about it, and she would tell them about Captain Evelyn "Ghost" Reeves, who had died for her country and lived to save it. The story never got easier to tell, but it never lost its power to remind her why they served. On clear days, when the light was just right, she could look up from her desk and see contrails sketching temporary messages across the sky, reminders that somewhere above the clouds, pilots were flying missions that mattered, trusting in intelligence that was honest, and following orders issued by leaders who remembered that their first loyalty was to the Constitution and the people who served under it. The ghosts had returned to the land of the living, but their vigil would never end. Some threats were too dangerous to ignore, some truths too important to bury, and some prices too high to pay in silence. They'd learned that lesson in the shadows, and they would never forget it in the light.